don't forget to kind of just knock out your quiz. You can do it here if you have extra time. Okay. If not, you can do it at home. You have until tomorrow. Unfortunately, I have to upload or update your grades on their main system, and they only give me a certain amount of time, especially for a short class like this. Okay, so let's talk about troubleshooting today. If you go for A plus certification, this is a very critical area that A plus emphasize a lot. Typically, A plus certification is used for technicians. So in the environment of IT and cybersecurity, troubleshooting is the norm, right? That's what you're paid to do. So the 6 steps in troubleshooting is required. You have to know this, right? Interviews, they're going to ask you, how do you troubleshoot a broken printer? How do you troubleshoot a broken network? How do you troubleshoot a broken computer? So think about the process and how you would first, identify the problem. Now, in a work environment, typically people would send you a ticket. They use a ticketing system. And you would get an email saying that, so and so using this system and the problem with it. But in some cases, they're not sure of the problem, right? They just tell you that my computer doesn't turn on, or I'm not able to use the printer because there's no power, right? So things like that. You don't exactly know the real problem, but you know that there's some issue that you need to fix. So what you need to do is you need to potentially think about what would be the problem, right? So power problem is very common. It's really easy, right? A lot of the times screens don't turn on. It's like I said before, it's because you check the physical connection first. Is the power connected? Is the button pressed? Because many people, in my experience, right, they just expect the computer to be on and they don't press the power to be on. And even some advanced people, surprisingly. So establish a theory about what will be the cause of the problem. Maybe it got disconnected. Maybe if a potentially like a laptop, maybe there's no power in the battery. Um, and then you started thinking about hardware versus software. So I always try to troubleshoot hardware first to eliminate potential causes. If that's not the actual reason, then I go into the software side. Because if you cannot power the computer on, then likely that you cannot reconfigure the computer. Understand? So it's really important to think about, like, check your physical cable, check your physical component. Is the LED light on? That's a pretty easy step to start. So ask yourself those questions and then start to narrow down the cause of the problem. Now, in security, sometimes we have a vast amount of causes, right? And so we kind of have to drill down, and sometimes you don't have a lot of time to do it. In incident response, or when you have problematic servers and things like that, you have a very small window. So just imagine if Amazon have their systems down for an hour and there's outages, you lose a lot of customers. So if you don't have a backup system to roll, you potentially, it can be very stressful, right? So you have to think about the time limitation in how you have the outage or how the user cannot access the system. So I typically write down the things that could be potentially wrong, right? I make a list of it and I go down the list to test. Like I mentioned to you before, the best thing to test hardware is to with a known good hardware. So if you, let's say that the computer does not have internet connection and it's using an Ethernet cable, right? I look in the back where it's connected to make sure. I look at the LED light. If the LED light is blinking and it's blinking green, then we potentially know that that port is working, that window for communication is working. Potentially, you could have a bad cable, right? Some technician, they make cable very fast and they plug it in and it works for a time being, but sometimes people unplug things or move things around that could be, that it could be loose. So I would test it with a good cable that I have, right? Turn it on, open the browser to see if I have internet connection. I would ping it, right, to see if it has network communications response. So those things are important. You test it. And if the theory that you test is not solving the problem, you move to the next theory until you solve it. So now a lot of the times you're going to see that it comes with experience because once you learn how to solve one problem, if that problem occurs again, it becomes quicker and better and you get better at it. So, technology sometimes can be very frustrating. Sometimes you cannot solve the problem right away and you have to be patient with it. I tell my forensic students all the time, you're trying to find something that's not known. So you kind of have an idea of what you need to find, but a lot of the times you don't know exactly what you need to find. So it's kind of hard to, and you have to be patient with the system and the software and the tools. So you have to be patient with yourself and the technology that you're working with, right? Because if there's no problem, you will not have a job. Like I said, if there's no security problem, security people will not have a job. There's always a security problem, right? So once you have the cost, then you would establish a plan on how to fix it. And sometimes you have to request the vendor to send you a new motherboard. Sometimes you have to replace a drive, and you don't have the equipment right away, so you have to come back to that particular system. And if you can fix it right away, then it's ideal. So you need to implement a solution. And in a lot of the interviews, they're going to ask you, how would you do that, right? So, I would go through the steps just like in my mind, like how I would check for communications or signal. I would make sure that the system would then reconnect. For example, we talked about the system not being on the internet. You should also have the user test because when you test, it might work, and then when they sit down, they use their application or they use the browser, it stopped working, right? And then you get called again. So what you do is after you test a few times and it's working, you restart the system and it works, then you bring the user back and you have them go through the process. So if they no longer have the problem, then you solved it. Okay. Um, and if you are a contracted technician, you get dispatched out and you solve the problem, they pay you by the hour. They pay you the time that you go out. Um, and then, after you're done, then that's your task for the day, or sometimes you move on to the next one. So you want to verify the functionality. And then you need to also teach the user, right? Like for me, it's really important that when I solve a problem, I tell the people how I solve the problem. So that way, when they come across the same problem again, they can solve it themselves, right? So the education part and the explanation part is important. People are going to be angry when their things are not working, and that's very typical, right? So you need to be kind of calming them down and you need to kind of walk them through why the things are not working. And then in the future, how they can prevent it from happening again. And in security, the prevention part is so important to us because nobody wants another data breach because it costs so much money, right? And then once you solve the problem, you write down the things that you've done so that way you can always have a reference. And you can always share that with another person, right? That's like your playbook. So in security, we have a playbook of how we solve a certain attacks and how we solve a certain problem. So in technology, that's very, very common. Think about like sports, like the coach have the playbook on how they can successfully score points, right? And that's how so a good technician, a good analyst is someone that would have kind of like a database or a group of things that they have worked on and they have solved. Okay, so rule of thumbs, always check the power supply, right? Um, how do you troubleshoot a power supply failure? We talked about how power supply tends to, it has a safety, right? So it turns off and it will reboot continuously until it has enough. If it doesn't have enough power, it's going to shut down. So you want to verify if the power supply is working. Now you might not have like meters to be able to check the actual electrical signal. Some people do. Like they sell equipment. Some of them are very expensive, right? And sometimes when you work for a company, they provide you with that. Communication company, typically they will give you a meter so you can check signal, but you don't always have that on hand at home. So, test your power connection, test your cable. And the way we test power supply is if you have another power supply, you can plug it in and check it, right? Sometimes people don't have a secondary system to be able to do that. But if you do IT for a living, you have to have some spare equipment. Yeah, I keep gadgets, so I always like, oh, I don't want to throw that away because I might need it. I become that electronic hoarder person, right? And my husband hates it so much because he's like, you have a garage full of parts. But I was like, well, what, in the case if I need to fix things again, then I'll just go back to that, right? But it's just the nature because I've done that for so long that I'm like, oh, I have a spare power supply that works. I'll keep it in case I need it to test something else. So it's good to have a secondary system like that. But if you don't have it, you can always bring it to a store and have them check it. A lot of the times, electronic stores, like Micro Center, stuff like that, they'll be happy to look at it for you. Best Buy, Eats, I don't know if a lot of times they have equipment in their vans, but sometimes they would charge for the service because it's still a business. um and then you want to be able to examine the device physically and then check it and then test it with a known device. Okay, so when you have system lockup, like people tell me all the time, I was doing this when my system is just not responding. That's very, very typical, right? Applications have issues with memory, or sometimes it's trying to generate a service, and malware is known to do that, right? Like malware, what it does, a lot of the malware, it initiates service. It sends data somewhere else, right? Like if you have a Trojan, like a keylogger, it would try to take your data and it would try to send it to the remote server. But if it cannot connect to that server, what will happen is it will take up all the processes and all the resources. So if you go to your task manager by doing Control-Alt-Delete on your computer and you look at your task manager, and if your CPU just spiked, that just means that your resources are consumed, right? And you should also see memory, but Control-Alt-Delete is really designed to kind of stop things, right? On the user side a little bit, so you can take a look at what's happening to your system. You can also go into safe mode, like reboot and select the safe mode option. But a lot of the application depends on memory, right? So if your RAM is inaccessible, like it's full, or something is utilizing it, you tend to see a few, not a large amount of malware that uh stays in RAM. They use RAM. So that's how we can find traces of malware is in storage, right? Because it uses RAM for processing. So if the corruption of memory happens, you tend to have like that blue screen of death for Windows, right? The little blue screen and the little sad face. That's what they have now. And then you should do a memory test after that. Or if your memory module physically is failing, that happens a lot with server because they just get used so much. Then you're running out of memory, or your memory is just going bad, so you have to replace it. Yeah, usually if servers are crashing, we can remotely boot it. But when things like this happen, you're gonna have to drive in to actually open the case and replace the memory. And you don't want that to happen at 3 a.m. So you always want to have prevented it, right? Like, um, I was an admin for a while, and then when I get a call late at night and they're talking about like the server is being funny, I already know, right? I was like, okay, let me get in my car and let me go there. So we have to kind of diagnose and see like what's happening. And sometimes it could be an application on how it's developed or it has bugs or stuff like that. You get some errors and it's just consuming resources. But now you have a lot of really good applications that are using the core effectively. Like, it's multitasking with the core. So you tend to not have a lot of like hog process. So it really depends. Okay. So, and you don't have to put verbatim, you can summarize. The whole point is for you to kind of see the content and kind of remember when I talk about it. Um, what should you do when you hear continuous high frequency beeps? A lot of the motherboard now doesn't really make any sound when you turn on. Originally, a lot of the PC, it has like different beeps to tell you like error codes or signals of it's kind of like a kid being sick. They might not tell you exactly like how they feel, but they might start crying, right? Or they might look really tired, right? There's sign that your computer is sick. So, when you have a lot of beeps, you need to check your motherboard processor and RAM module. If it's loose or something, if the RAM goes bad, it will not boot. But typically it comes back to the core components, okay? So Tom asked you to fix his computer that has a blank screen when it turns on. How do you assist Tom to troubleshoot the computer, right? I always start with power to see if you have, so check power cable and power button. So if the power cable is connected, right, to the surge protector, we talked about surge protector. You don't want to connect your computer directly to the outlet. You can, right, but the current can damage your computer if it's inconsistent. You check to make sure that the power button is pressed, because sometimes that happens too. These computers, sometimes it goes into safe, like low power, saving mode. So you have to turn it on physically, and then you have to change the input. It's just the way the monitor is made. So, press your power button, check your input, and then I wanted to verify the data cable. So when we say data cable, that's like HDMI, display cable, right? If you use the old school monitor or old school screen, VGA, DVI, etc. It could be the serial ones. So make sure that you check the cable. So I always start with the physical, right? And then the hardware components, and then I transition to the software, because you can't do anything on the software if you cannot see anything, right? You cannot turn it on. So we would start with the physical, just logic.
So it works with the laptops though. Works the same way.
Yeah. So laptops likely power source, right? Your battery charge. And then if you turn it on and the screen is blank, but if it flickers, that means that your screen is going bad. I had a laptop that was doing that. It turns on and then it starts flickering, and then it just turned off. But you can see the keyboard, the power is running. So what I did was I took my laptop, I plug it the HDMI cable to a monitor, and I can see everything. So that means that my screen is bad for sure, right? And then I have to replace my screen. And sometimes, when you slam your screen shut, sometimes, or you move things around, you drop your laptop, right? Dropping laptop definitely can damage screens. And then sometimes the hinges is connected to the sensor or the actual power source to the laptop. Some of them are like that, then they can get damaged as well over time. Okay. So we verify the cable, and then you can also, most processor now you shop for your project, right? You see that there's an onboard or integrated graphics, so we can disable that because sometimes it's gonna revert to that particular feature versus if you have an adapter. So if he has an adapter and the processor also have graphic capability, we need to disable one because sometimes the systems, it sees both of them and it gets confused, like which one. So, and then we can connect the cable directly into the adapter. But most laptop, you don't have an adapter, right? It's built into the actual processor or the motherboard itself. So you would then check. And when I work with that, you know that it's gonna have multiple ports, right? Like an HDMI and possibly a display. So we can plug different cable in and see which port. Um, and so if it's a bad motherboard, then you're gonna have to replace the motherboard. Okay. So we want to use the input buttons to change the video. Those are the F keys that we talked about. Those are called function keys. So you can change like, the intensity, the light of your screens and so on, or you can also change the input. So on this monitor that you're sitting in front of, right next to the power button, there's like it's right beneath. If on your right hand side, if you touch like at the bottom of the screen, right? At the bottom of the screen right here, you can see right here, right? The power button is the most right, and then next to it would be an input. And then some of the TV, they have them on the edge. So typically you would feel them on the edge, and that's how you're able. So when you change the input, that just switches between HDMI or display and so on. And sometimes it could be on the wrong input, right? So
So Professor.
yeah.
For the laptop, they use the display and the HDMI use different cards or no?
So some laptop comes with HDMI, mine does, right? And then some that laptop comes with display or other ports connection. The standard right now is I think they make HDMI for laptop. It's only because HDMI is very common. A couple years from now, I know display is also integrated, but mostly for like higher gaming system. A few years from now, it might be a different thing, right? They might come up with a different standard that will.
So when you have the USB port, USB-C port,
Yeah.
you can get an adapter and.
Yeah, so C on I know Apple integrated C also for display, but make sure you get the cable that's USB-C that's capable of display because not all USB-C can do that. Some of them are only made to transfer data or charge or both, right? So you don't typically have my laptop has C ports, but it's only used for data transfer. And I cannot charge with the C USB. I have to charge with the AC adapter. Yeah. So it really depends on the system, but I know Apple had come up with the C for display, so make sure you get the cable. It's a little bit more, but not too much more. Okay. So we talked about a known good device, like you can use another adapter, right? Use another cable, that's good. Test it so that way you can eliminate like what could potentially be bad. So you're given an old computer. When it's turned on, you notice that the clock is wrong, right? So older system over time, or if you have a computer at home right now and you turn it on and you have the configuration for your region correct, but the clock is off, right? Like it says 9 a.m. instead of, 5 p.m., etc. What will be the cause? So typically it's the battery on the motherboard. Because if you have the region, like you select Pacific Standard Time on the operating system, you select Los Angeles, you select US, right? We did that when we did the installation, and that really connected. Now, anytime that you connect the computer to the network, it syncs with the network clock, right? there's a server called time server, right? That's how when you change time, like what when you have daylight saving, you don't have to go and change your phone anymore because your mobile network they push that. It synchronizes with the server that the system that you connect into. But the computer, if the battery is going bad, or if it doesn't have a battery on the new motherboard, it has a chip. That means that you have to replace the battery or the chip. This battery is very affordable. Sometimes you can find it at a dollar store, or if you go to like Energizers, they price it a little higher, so you might pay like a few dollars for it. Now, CMOS battery, when you take it out, just make sure that you have the correct number because they look the same, but they're not exactly the same. So you can take it out and then you can put in a new battery. On the chip, to replace the chip, you have to take it out and you have to solder back the chip in. So you probably have to order the part and if it's still under the warranty, you send the motherboard back to the manufacturer like MSI. And they would have the warranty department handle it. But if it's older and it doesn't have the warranty anymore, then you might have to fix it or live with a bad clock, right? So,
It won't affect the performance, like when you are downloading, uploading the.
No. So the CMOS battery is a very low power component. It's really used for a few things. One is going to be the time, right? Two is going to be your BIOS, which is your basic input output. Your system requires a list of hardware components when it boots. And that battery keeps the energy enough to retain that list. Once it boots, everything is powered through your power source, which is your power supply. So just like over time, if you had a bad clock, right, it goes bad. So what you see is you just replace the battery and you would likely have the time correctly again. As long as you connect to the network, now all networks have synchronization. So okay, a client asks you to fix her computer, which is continuous rebooting. What is the source of the problem and how do you troubleshoot it? So potentially it could be overheating or power supply. So those two things are going to come to mind, but the most common problem is going to be your power supply. Okay. So over time, it could be that power supply is deteriorating and that happens too. Or it could be that they have added more components to the motherboard that requires more power distribution and the power supply is limited. Okay. So let's say that I have old computer and it's 250 watts and I added like a new video card that takes up a lot of wattage. That can also cause depletion or not enough power for the rest of the other components. So they sell multimeter and you can find them for $20. I used to have them around. I think I gave it to the makerspace. So they look like they're like this long and it has a little reader screen and it has the red and the black like pen light. Okay. So you would touch the positive to the positive and the negative to the negative, and then the meter would give you like the gauge if it's received signal, right? So that's how you're able to test power supply. If you are gonna be, PC technician, IT technician, I recommend that you get a multimeter. If you want to test electronics at home or test power on your computer, you can also get a multimeter. You can find them used too, but cheap brand new through Amazon is probably $20. It used to only be like a lot less, but everything is higher in price. And then if you have a spare power supply, you can just plug it in and verify that that's a problem. Now, if it's a heating issue, that means that your fans are failing or it's not cooling enough. It means it's running too hot. So old computers tend to gather lint and dust, right? Like I said before, go blow it out with a hair dryer, right? Or you can buy the compressed canned air, But when you spray the compressed canned air, read the instruction. I know it's easy to read the instruction on the canned air, right? Attach the nozzle, and they tell you how to angle it, because when you spray excessively, the can gets really cold, right? But you're gonna notice that there's this little powder residue that's from the gas they put inside the canned air. So just be mindful about, and when you spray it, keep it at a distance, because that little particle gets onto your motherboard, and then when you turn it on, it can be also damaging. So I always use like high speed hair dryer, because I have access to that at home. But a lot of the technician, they use compressed air, the ones that they use at the mechanics. But when you hose the computer down, you also have to be far away, because they're very strong. Okay. Your computer likes to breathe, and it likes to clean. So I will tell you a story. When I was a technician, like a couple months in, I work for EDS, who dispatch technician to go install in different offices. And one of the jobs that I had to do, most jobs were like, I don't have to refurbish the computer. I'm the technician that comes, and then they already load the van with all the equipment, and I go in and install the equipment. But one of the job, the companies did not buy good refurbished or new computer. Okay. And then whoever did the refurbish on that job did not do a good job. So I brought the towers in, and as I was installing it, I noticed that there's like bugs. And then I open it, and yeah, some of them have roaches crawling out. So there was cell phone back in the day, right? So I called my site manager, and I was like, whoever did the refurbish on this is like no good, because they're just lazy. They just didn't clean it. So what they did was they just tested to see if it turns on, and then they put it in my van, right? So I traveled with another technician, and then so I was like, look at this, right? There's like hair and lint, and so whatever the company that they got the computer from, because back then that's very popular, they would buy used computer that people maybe shut down their business, and then they would take it, clean it up, and use it. They still do it today. I think K-Force used to have something like that, and so we had to send back like that whole batch, and so I had to wait another 2 hours for them to bring new computers to my site. They still have to pay me, right? But it slows down the job. So just keep in mind that if you have pets, if you use computer over time, right? And even laptops, you guys already saw, right? You open it up, it's dusty, and because particles get in there. People eat around their computer. I do. I know that, right? When I'm working, I'm like, oh, I want to stay awake, so I want to drink something and eat something, and sometimes that gets to the computer too. So you can keep it clean and cool. That's important. So Larry's computer does not turn on. What is a common cause? This is a common problem, right? We already talked about power supply, loose power cable, power buttons not being pressed. That's typical. Check the case, right? Power button typically has LED lights. And if everything is installed correctly, check it, right? So if it's not blinking the light, potentially it's not pressed. Bad power connection. So if you have bad surge protector or a bad outlet, that can also be the cause. Yeah. And then you also have missing or front panel connection, which ties back to your power button. Now, in a network like this, we do WIC on LAN and also power on the network. So I can be a technician in NOC, which is back over there, right? And if I want to update this computer, I don't have to run over here and turn things on, right? I have already set up the configuration on when I can actually wake them up. And we do that remotely, so that way it's convenient, and so that way you don't have to run across the campus 100 and something rooms to turn everything on. So you can, remotely turn everything on, and then you can run updates, so you can install software through the network. And that's definitely, something that you see in the business environment. Okay. So not always that you have to press the power to actually turn it on. You can configure it. And automation is really big for us because it helps you, people always talk about like AI is a bad thing, but you have to look at the positive side too. AI is gonna streamline a lot of stuff, for the people. But it's also, and then people are like, oh, it's replacing people. That's true. Just like how, we have coaches that ride the wagon and horses, and now you have cars, and now you have cars with no driver, and then eventually you have spaceships and different things. So yeah, like we move forward with technology, it's supposed to help us, right? It's great. I really feel like, your search results on the internet is way better because before you would have to look through all of these websites for the right information, but now it narrows it down for you and it gives you a little bit more closer to what you're looking for, which is good. So what are the common causes in overheating? Overloading. So if you're overclocking your processor, right? Um, if you are using it a lot, like if you're mining Bitcoin with your computer, which people do. I saw this documentary about like how they have these farms to mine Bitcoin, right? Um, and they have like almost like you look at it, it's like a data center. All of these servers were really powerful, and that comes from like United States, China, everywhere. Um, when Bitcoin start to really pick up, you still see some of that today. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of overloading. If you have fan failure, so if you're naturally cooling your computer, and also even with liquid cool, right? You do have some fan attachment to that. So, um, liquid cool is so much cheaper and safer to install now. Back in the day, you kind of had to use a risky system. And then I had a former student, he had built back then a $10,000 tower, which is probably, way too expensive. But what he did was he customized the liquid cool system, right? Like building his own tubes and all of those things. And it ended up being, so I was like, so now that's a huge investment. Are you afraid that people are gonna like break into your place and take your computer? I mean, it's a huge asset now, right? But he said that like he bolted it down in the closet. I've done some physical security assessment for some of the smaller business. Um, they have there was this one company that they have servers on wheels, like on these racks, and they would move it from room to room, or because they just didn't have enough system across. And I was like, aren't you afraid that people are gonna wheel your entire server out of the building? And so, so that was an item that I have them, go back and maybe thinking about like having a secure lock environment. And sure enough, like a month later, somebody broke through the window and wheeled their server out of the facility. And they had to replace all the data. And when they called me, they were like, I was like, yeah, we gotta roll your backup. Do you have your backup? And they were like, oh, it was, and then they also have somebody that take drives with them after they back it up. I was like, what if their carport gets broken into? What if they lose their drives? Like, there's company that you can pay that they come, like how people you see that the guards come to put money into the ATM. There's company that would be safely securing your drives and things, and they move it to their storage that way. Iron Mountain used to be really big back in my days. Yes.
There's a KFC on Van Buren and Wood, and they had an ATM machine
Uh-huh.
next to the door. Somebody just ran the car and took the whole machine.
Yeah, so the little ATM machine that you see at the liquor store, I would advise you to be mindful about using those because if you look at an ATM machine and if it has like a little green attachment that looks suspicious, that looks like it's just been attached to it, some of them have them because they are part of the ATM machine. So question how you insert your card, like look at it carefully because that's a reader that's reading your card, and then yeah, they can take the entire ATM machine. I'm sure you've seen movies of people doing this, right? But you have to have special keys to open up those ATM machines, by the way. So they probably have to go in with like jack and hammer and saw to just like breaking a safe. Um, but I serviced ATM machine before, and I used to come out there with guards. They would come with me because when you open up the panel, right? The your manager, they give you a key, but for my part, the component that so you access the computer that's within. And back in my days, you just run like updates and stuff. They still do that, but we used to have to use CDs and storages to be able to push the updates. Now you do everything through the network. I've seen technician that came to service Wells Fargo and Bank of America before when I come there, like at variation when it's not too busy. That's when they come. Okay, we talked about dirt and dust, inadequate airflow to the system for that question. For 10, how would you improve airflow for your computer? You should make sure that your cable is not impeding the airflow. Remember, we talked about ATX on how the air circulates, right? It goes from top to bottom, and then on the ITX, so the fan positions are good. So make sure that your cable is not in the way, so it's blocking the air. And when it blocks the air, it runs hot. So in server or data center, what you see is that they would have like air conditioning units that's blowing, and then they also sometimes have like cooling floor because they would do a subfloor when they run the cable like fiber directly into the server rack. So when you go into the server room, it's pretty chilly. And then you also have like this here's a drop ceiling so that way you don't see the cable running across. You don't see cable only like to your computer, but you don't see too much cable running on the side. And the cable is hidden if you look in this panel. You see, so there's companies that specialize in making that, right? Penduit is one of them. Like they make conduit that runs through. A lot of the drops for like multi-floor like this is happening right below on the side of elevator shaft. So it runs the cable to the elevator shaft, which is typically near the stairway, but because they cut out things for the elevator, so behind the elevator shaft, you typically would have cables. So I ran a lot of cables in my days. I was small, so they used to send me to the sub ceiling. And then back then, you didn't really have smartphone where you just call. You would have walkie-talkie, and then you're like, oh, so we would bring the cable down. But you're gonna see, so it's clean, and also they don't cut your cable, right? People can yank your cable just to get you disconnected. Okay, so we would want to remove the dust by using vacuum cleaner, like those handheld one that you use for cars. That's cool too. You can use compressed air. 12. John uses USB port on the PC to charge his Android smartphone. He notices that the smartphone does not get charged sometimes. What is the cause of the problem and how should he fix it? So first thing first, USB cable, they go back fairly quickly because they're cheaply made. So check it with a good cable. And if that charges, that's a bad cable. Throw it away. Okay. You might have insufficient power from the power supply. So PSU stands for power supply unit. So if your power supply is limited, let's say that I have a 300 watts power supply and I'm using it for all the other components already, it sparingly give power to the front panel to charge external devices. So you would go back to the other questions, right? You would see how you can test power supply unit. And then potentially that USB port can be bad on the motherboard. And that's typically down the list a little bit further because motherboard, unless it's out of the box bad or there's a lot of damage to the motherboard than that what you typically would see. So test the connection with other good devices, right? Like I would check other ports and then plugging in other devices. And then if that's the case, you can replace the motherboard. That means you have to take everything out, right? Disconnect your drive. You saw how you accessed the motherboard the other day. So a little bit more tedious. Okay, Jacqueline turns on her computer, notice a strong burning smell, right? It shouldn't be smelling anything. Coming from the inside of the computer, what would be the fix of the problem? So if the smell, right, try to check where the smell is coming from, and typically it's from your PSU, your power supply unit. You should replace your power supply if you start to smell it, right? Because if you don't, you're gonna have more problems later. So you don't want to have, but they do a safe on these power supply when they make them. However, you never know, right? Just like how people say that, you shouldn't use your smartphone, or power banks in certain areas like gas station and so on. Sometimes you're gonna get some bad equipment and might blow up, right? So power supply might not blow up, but burnout smell is probably causing from like the actual cable of the connection, and you don't want more like fire-based type of activity
I've
happening.
got a question.
Sure.
Problem number 12. When you say replace the motherboard doesn't come with an additional slot where you can put the driver, or
It should have multiple USB, but when you plug in other ports and if it's also bad, then that's the hub, right? Because it's that group. So there's one chip that's in charge of that group, and potentially that chip could go bad, or because we plug things in and remove them or yank them out, it also gets loose or bad over time. Okay. Now, capacitor. I wish I didn't throw away all my old stuff. I got rid of all of that when we moved over here from the other room. But capacitor, they look like little tiny battery. They're like a size of half of your pinky, right? Think of it like a little cylinder, and it's like this short. Okay, it's like about a quarter of an inch. And they're all over your motherboard. So capacitor is used concurrently for its capacitors for your signal or power. And over time, some motherboard, you would see that capacitor can go bad when they have this little white or brownish residue around it. So just think of it like it looks kind of dirty. You know how when you have like water stain or hard water stain, it looks kind of like that. And that's when you know it's a bad capacitor. So when you physically look at the motherboard and around this little small attached cylinder, and they look like tiny little batteries that's on there, right? You're gonna see that there's like around it, you might have like little white or brownish residue. Then that means that your capacitors are going bad. Yeah, people can replace a capacitor, but in my opinion, a lot of times it's a manufacturer issue, so you should start looking into replacing that motherboard. Okay, but replacing capacitor is not hard. You can have equipment to be able to do that. It's electronic equipment. Okay, 14. What should you do when you encounter blue screen of death, right? The little blue screen. You using an application, and all of a sudden, boom, you get a blue screen and a little sad face. You have a memory dump error. Okay? This happens on the server sometimes when you have buffer overflow, like application that's using your memory and it's not able to access the memory or the address on the memory. You might have like attacks that also happen or malware that can cause that. But in your typical system, it's application related. It's memory and application. So it will give you a code. It's like, XX8034. It's a long code, right? take your phone out, take a picture of it, go to the internet, right? Reddit might have something on it. Everybody reads Reddit these days. Before my former students, they would be like Stack Overflow, right? Stack Overflow has some information, but not all fixes on there is right. I read some stuff on there, even Stack Overflow. I looked at some solution that they recommended, especially in the cybersecurity area, and I was like, oh, they're kind of off a little bit, or sometimes they're good, right? It depends on who answered that question. It's a community based. But search the internet. AI might give you something that you can work with, or some web resources that you can refer to. So the error code is going to tell you like why it's doing that, what's wrong with your memory and your application. So restart your computer, research. So when you, and I typically do a memory check. It would recommend that for you anyway. So check your memory, and it uses the software to go in. So when it does a memory check, it's just going to try to write into the addresses. So memory check is kind of like someone goes down every single house and see, hey, is it empty? Is it there? Is the data there? Is it empty? Right? Check every single house to see if someone's there, someone's not there, or can someone go there? You know, quickly, and it only took minutes. So the cause of that is defective hardware or software. A lot of it has to do with software and sometimes hardware for RAM or motherboard. Windows problem. So registry is a system that Windows implemented. It is a tracking system. Think of it like a database. It's a list of all the hardware and all the software that's been changed, modified. So as soon as you install, let's say, a solid state drive, it adds it to the registry. It adds it to the device manager, but on the operating system side, registry is a way that Microsoft tracks the state of individual components and application. So if you install, let's say I decided that I don't like using Edge, I want to install Chrome browser, right? It's in the registry. So registry has everything about the computer, right? On the software level. This is where we do a lot of forensic. So when people are creative and they start tweaking things before they leave, like let's say that I have a disgruntled employee and they encrypt a bunch of things, or they started taking data and exfiltrated, stuff like that. We can go back and see, not in just there, but event viewer and other things that we check. So fraud is a big internal things that you see. Internal threats is way harder than checking attacker coming from outside, because it could be the next person that been working with you for 10 years and they can just turn, right? So you see some of that in cybersecurity as well. And then malware. Okay. So that's memory dump error that you see for the error code. Now in cybersecurity, we can do a lot with that. We can check RAM, especially for malware. Did you know that when you log in, right, your credential goes to RAM, and also it goes across the network, right? So if you log into a network, right, your credential has to be passed from your computer to the server. So of course it goes to the network, but temporarily it actually store a lot of stuff, especially if you're using web application. If you're using web application, your credential is also in your cookies, okay? And so when they say they do cookie poisoning, is that they take that cookie and they modify it, right? So everybody wants you to store a cookie one way or another, so that way they can listen in or they can see what you're doing. So it's a way to spy on you. So,
But sometimes if you reject the cookies,
well, they just passed a law that they have to prompt you that. Originally, it wasn't there.
okay.
They have to give you that option that when you can opt out. But a lot of the website, if you notice, they make it harder for you to, you have to go through like 5 steps in order to do that. And if you're in a hurry, of course, you're just gonna accept all, right? Sometimes, and then if you ignore it, sometimes it automatically still creates it anyways, right? So, okay. Tools that you need to add to the basic computer repair kit. We talked about this before, right? About having screwdriver, flashlight, a container for your tiny screws. You should have a multimeter, right? I talked about that before to check your power supply. You can also buy power supply tester, loop back plugs. I always bring cabling kit, right? If you take the next class, you will have some experience with that. I have some kits here. So that's gonna help me, like if I need to make a quick cable or if I need to cut the end of a cable and then, insert a new connector, then I can do that. I always travel with many USB cables, not just one type, right? Two of the same type. And I'm still like that when I'm traveling because it's like, do I have enough charging cable in case something happens, right? So
Back cable, the same as jumper cables or no?
I'm sorry?
Jumper cables?
Yes.
Okay. What about POST?
Postcard. So Post was used for older system to check error. So when your computer boots, it does an inventory of everything that it needs, right? Like motherboard, drive, RAM, right? Processor. So remember why I talk about a list? So it uses that list to check to see. It's kind of like processor, check, right? RAM working, check, right? So when you go through the process, the power on self test is what POST stands for. If you're taking A plus, you need to know power on self test. So it's kind of like before you leave your home, you're like, I have car keys, check, right? I have my water, check, right? I have my backpack and laptop, check, right? That's what it does. It goes through and it checks to see if all the components receive power accordingly, power on self-testing. So what we do is when we're trying to troubleshoot it, they sell a card or a USB adapter that you can plug in and you can do the check with it, right? In case it can't check it and something is wrong, it won't boot. You have to use it. But Post is like an old technology for the motherboard. Your system still does it. But the old computer, when it does a very short beep when it starts, that means it's good, right? Motherboard now, they don't really make any sound anymore. When I first became a technician, that's what I used to have to remember. If it beeps 5 times, it's this. If it beeps a long time, it's this, right? And different motherboard beeps differently. So the industry was like, why are we having all different system and it's so hard to fix? Where, we can just have one unified thing. And eventually we got that now, right? But power on self-test still is a process when your computer powers on. Understand? So it does a check for everything that should receive signal and before it actually loads what you see on screen. Very important. Okay. We are halfway there. What are common causes in read and write failure on drives, right? How do you detect these things? And this is more of like the hard drive or even in the case of internal drive that you're looking at. Physical damage to the drive, hard drive, that's a common thing. So over time, remember what I said? So it has a bearing and the arm move back and forth, right? And it has a laser. It doesn't touch the actual platter. So they have these platter kind of like record discs spinning, right? And the bigger the drives, you're gonna have more platters because there's sectors, and each sector size is 512 bytes. That comes more important later if you deal with like storage, forensic, and other things. But if for some reason you have a head crash, is when that reader, that arm sometimes also cannot move, right? It breaks down just like how cars break down and mechanical things break down. Or it accidentally and it drops and it touches the platter. just like how the needle scratches the record, then it can cause damage to the record. It's kind of like a little bit closer to that analogy. So you're gonna hear noise, like scratching noise. So when you turn on a computer and you hear the drives, like it has like a weird light scratching noise, your drive is going back. Okay. That's a hard drive. Solid state, there's no movement parts, right? Typically you would have like failed, it would generate some kind of either application error, some kind of error where it cannot store anymore. Um, you know, so you would see that, but even in the case you don't get an error and your computer doesn't turn on, that means your C drive is bad and your C drive is on your solid state drive. We saw the partition yesterday. Damaged cable, like the SATA cable, it's disconnected or it goes bad. Damaged host adapter on the motherboard. So the way that you connect the drive, and you saw that when you open up the desktop, the drive, data cable, power cable, right? And then that data cable goes to the motherboard. So on the motherboard, if that port, that connection is bad, then your drive cannot receive or send any information through that bus. Okay. Sometimes also drive can get very hot, right? You use your USB, you touch it, it's warm. Okay. So now on the laptop, it is 2.5 inch, where the desktop is 3.5 inch for drives. So the bay sizes are different. And sometimes on the laptop, it's more compact. And so laptop should have fans. And if the fans are not working, then it's not cooling. It could be overheating components inside. Or if you have overheating chipset belongs to motherboard, right? And then CPU. Yeah, in the old A+ book, it also talk about a daughter board and other things, but that's not common anymore. I don't know how I just remember a lot of these things. It's probably through just rereading some of these things and then also like working on these things. So I just started remembering over time. And then, it's kind of like knowing how to drive. If you keep driving all the time, then you know. So you should check your fans. You should make sure that there's airflow, there's nothing impeding or dirt or grease. And then the processor also rely on thermal paste because that's how it disseminate or it remove the heat. Also your heat sink, right? We saw that before. So the thermal paste dried up after a few years, right? And the tube for it is less than $10. So you can get them. I like Arctic Silver, that's the brand. But like I said, there's generic brand that Amazon or other vendors sells that's good too. A tube will last you many computers. So you don't have to buy because sometimes they'll try to get you to buy like 3 tubes for like $20. 3 tubes, you should give it to your friends who build gaming PC also, right? The kids at the makerspace, sometimes they run in there and they're like, Dr. Nguyen, do you have thermal paste? And then I would try to dig through my drawer. I was like, I might, but it might be dried up by now because I don't build PC like every month. So, but yeah, so you don't need a lot for that. Just need like a pea size. Okay. All right. So how do you improve your performance for your serial ATA, which is your hard disk, or thing, like could be optical, like CD-ROM or DVD. So you need to remove the jumper and set the jumper for the rated drive speed. Sometimes the jumper is set in the wrong area, so it slows it down. On your drive, or even like the solid state, it'll tell you specification about like that drive, right? Like the RAID for read and write, because that's what the drive does. It reads. You can read the data from it, and then you can also store data into it, so it's an I/O. On the hard drive, it will tell you like RPM because there's spinning platters inside, right? And so those specifications can be important, so you can check out the rated on how the speed of the drive is. And then you just need to use the correct cable or connection. And you also need to configure the adapter. So RAID is still being used, right? Old technology. It stands for Redundant Array Integrated Disk. That means it's a group of drives that's used for backup. Okay. And if you are starting for A+, make sure you know all the RAID level. So I've had students that ask me about, can I set up RAID for my computer? You can. So the way RAID works is you can write to 2 drives at the same time, like 1 and 2. You can duplicate one drive exactly to another. You can write across 3 drives. You can write. It's really designed for like servers and backup servers.
Yeah, I was gonna mention a lot of the questions on here because I did one of the practice tests or exams for the A+, a lot of the stuff on here, and then RAID was mentioned a lot. But one of them was like, if workspace wanted the fastest speed, but they don't care about this, safety of it dropping or anything, which one would it be? I think the highest number, but it was 0
Right.
because you can run it all 4, but then you have 4 times the chance if one breaks, then
Yeah.
I was like,
So yeah, 0 they span, and then but the best way to go is the 0, 1, or they call it 10, 1, 0. Is so you mirror and you span across. But I think if they don't care about the price, I would go with a higher array, like 5.
Those 5 or 6.
Yeah, so that way you do have more reliability in the 5.
Yeah. So 0's more speed but risky, pretty much.
Yeah, people tend to do 0 and 1 or 1, 0. So you would, yeah. So it's ideal. Companies still use RAID, okay? Data centers still use RAID, and RAID technology is from the 80s, okay? So a lot of the stuff is going to say, yeah, A+ likes to ask about that. And I've taught classes that's A+ based for a long, long time, and it hasn't changed. So the way that the certification work is they just use old question and they added more questions into it, like new technology, and it randomly generated. But because it's still in the field, so you have to know. If you work at data center, you have to know. Okay. And then make sure that we choose auto setting for the host adapter. This should be by default when you get it out of the box sometimes, but just make sure you double check. Okay, let me move 19 down. I know some of you might be still covering that. So how do you improve solid state drive, right? Most of you have solid state drive externally, internally. You use solid state drive at where you're sitting now at the computer. So if it is connecting through the SATA adapter, make sure that you look at the ports, right? You can also use tools so this is recommended by Microsoft. You don't have to put verbatim, but ultimately this part is the partition tool that you saw yesterday. Okay? And what you need to do is you need to specify it when you create the section of the drive so that way it is efficient. You can use utility to be able to trim, right? So trim, we talked a little bit about that yesterday. That's going to help you on how data is written to the actual drive and how it can retrieve that data. If you want a third-party tool, this is a software that you have to install outside of what you see in like Optimize. We saw that yesterday, which is the original defragmenter. It just organizes your data so that way it can quickly retrieve it. And trim is just, it takes a space and then make sure that it puts it into where it can use it. So those addresses become available again. But there's utility that you can download and install. AlpaSoft make SSD tweaker, so you can use that to be able to increase the performance for your solid state. So you can control it from the software level. But if you buy some solid state, they also have their own tools. So in my opinion, there are good solid state companies that are well known, but you do have some new companies that gives you viable drives, right? Samsung has been leading in making drives and monitor for a long time. So I typically will buy a Samsung drives, but if you can go with like other brands. SanDisk, I've been to their facility in San Jose, right? And then Kingston, I think, they're in Orange County. That's when you see a lot of Kingston technology. I think they've just been bought by someone. But they're actually in Fountain Valley, California. So they sponsor many parks in Orange County and do a lot of kids based education program. But Kingston also been producing stuff. So a lot of memory company actually produce some solid state drive. And Samsung been producing memory for a long, long time. Longer than you see than their TV in the store. Okay. Television was something that came later. But the son of Samsung now is the CEO of the company. He changes the market to really push for display, smartphone, and all of those things. But his father was more for like storage, and they make a lot of like industrial stuff too. Question? Okay. Okay, so if you hear loud clicking noise from an old computer, right? What is the problem? It could be defective disk if it's a hard drive. Um, it's a failing drive. So if you have an old laptop and you hear ticking noise, I had one that was like that, right? Turning on, using it for a little bit, you hear like a slight tick, and you can feel it too. So yeah, the disk is going bad, and if you don't replace it, eventually you lose your data. So I have a lot of questions about, oh, my disk died, so how can I access it? I need to get data from it, right? If it's no longer moving, it's like a car that's dead. You cannot drive it anymore, right? But if you started to hear ticking noise and you took it out of the computer, you can plug it into another computer and pull the data from it, or you can buy adapter. They have USB-based adapter. It has like a little casing, and then you plug the drive in. Yeah, don't touch the board on the drive with your fingers, right? And then when you plug it in, turning it on, do not touch the drive. So don't open up the hard disk, because the way it's designed is it's vacuum sealed, and once you open it, it's damaged. Right? There are companies that can do forensic where they take the pattern, they read it, they have special equipment to do that. So but yeah, so that's a way that we can do it. If you're suspecting it's going bad, back up your data if you're still able to use it. Because once it's failed, right? If you want to pay some company a lot of money, they charge a lot to be able to take it apart and trying to recover your data. And sometimes that's not worth it. But cloud your data. That's probably is more effective overall, because you're always going to have access to the internet and download it. Like family pictures and videos and those things. I think, the way that we look at storage and the information that we put in it, right? Consistently, because of social media, your data extends and lasts much longer because things get backed up over time, right? That account always exists on a server somewhere. And then in the case that if you need to pull it, you don't have access to it anymore, you can ask them, data retention, they can refuse and tell you, no, we don't have it anymore, right? But typically within 5 years, you should be able to retrieve it and ask them. Now, in the case that if someone else asks, right, they have to have a court order signed by a judge. And typically companies take months to be able to, because they have to go back to some backup and then be able to pull. So in the case that if you see like fraudulent cases or criminal cases where they need to pull text messages and stuff from communication company, or even like chat messages, etc., right? Like they have to submit the court order, and that division, they would go in and they would pull the data and release it. But it's a lot quicker to find it on that person's device compared to going to the vendor or provider like Google, Microsoft. Yeah, I tell my student, I was like, yeah, be very careful about what you do and what you use on what network you're connecting to, right? You might think that they don't know what you're doing. It takes one network scan to know exactly what you're doing, like what website you visit, what you upload, what you download, etc., right? So, and always think about like who's looking at me. Be in a paranoia mode. Yeah, especially if you're using public Wi-Fi, just don't use anything sensitive. You guys should know that already, right? Like paying bills, accessing sensitive information, stuff like that, because it takes one scan for me to look at what you're looking at.
Professor,
Yeah.
when you do travel, like some of these phones we use these days, they connect to the local network automatically.
So, but that's a setting that you enabled, right? We have a choice in what we use, correct? Right? Like you can turn things off and so if you set it to be automatically connecting to RCCD whenever you come here, it's gonna connect, right? But you should enable it when, like, I'm gonna tell you when you're gonna connect, right? So if you check that box, always connecting to this network so you don't have to put in authentication or key, right? Like you go home, it automatically connects to your home network because it's safe. But there, because yeah, there's so many, it's risk.
My question was kind of different. When you travel, especially out of the country, sometimes you buy, if you use Verizon, I use T-Mobile,
Okay.
you buy that international package. You disable it, you won't be able to connect to the internet.
Right. So you can connect to their mobile network. Just be mindful of what
It's
you
only local.
Yeah. So only be mindful of what you're doing on it, right? Like let's say if you're searching the internet for hotels and things, and sometimes hotel provides you with services, and I'm skeptical about that too,
Okay.
right? But a lot of the hotels now is like they give you your own access. Before it's just like a public Wi-Fi, and then public Wi-Fi is like it could be the guy down the street using it. So I was staying at a hotel overseas one time and it was like super unsafe Wi-Fi. And I was on a Zoom call with the people here doing my vacation. So I had to access it. And as soon as I connect to it, my security software turns on. So and so was trying to breach you, right? So I had to like go on the VPN. Yeah, it's good to use VPN service. And then if you can buy a SIM, you can get hotspot out wherever country. A lot of them have it. Even eSIM works. Some country don't allow eSIM though, just to let you know. Okay. They regulate that but a lot of the countries have national firewalls. So even if my app from America would keep getting dropped, right? Like they would boot it out. So I was trying to use like Amazon Music for some time, and it would terminate like every 5-10 minutes. So yeah, they use national firewall and stuff like that too. So. But it's good to think about that. All right, 22. Mark installed SATA drive on his computer. It's not recognized by the operating system, right? What should he do? Shut down the computer, right? Disconnect it from the power first. We want to be safe. Reconnect the power and the data cable to the drive. Access the BIOS or UEFI to see if the drive is recognized. If it is, then he can format the drive to use. Now, if it continues to be the problem, right, we would go through test troubleshooting process. We talked about test it with the known good cable, right? So plug it into another port to see. It could potentially be another bad port, but it could be the drive itself. So take that drive and plug it into another computer. If it recognizes that drive, then it's not the drive, right? So process of elimination. So you have to go the extra step to kind of see what's the problem, right? And it could be the motherboard that is not connecting and not recognizing. So if it's not the drive, then it's a motherboard because we already tested the cable. So 3 things we looked at there. Anna recently installed Windows 10 on her PC. She restarts the computer. The monitor says OS not found. Right. What's the problem? So likely that there might sometimes, the system is configured to boot from USB or optical drive or whatever it is. And so the priority boot might be to the USB, not the drive, right? So go in and reconfigure the priority boot, remove the USB if it's attached, right? Typically, sometime if it's trying to boot from the USB and it doesn't find boot files, it's going to say that. Restart the computer to access BIOS, and then change your boot priority, like the order of the boot. So it should be default to the drive. We boot to the USB when we first install. So if you want to install on the computer, you download, remember what I showed you, the Microsoft website, you download the ISO and then you use their tool or Rufus to unpack so you can have boot files on your USB. Make a bootable USB, follow the instruction, change your boot priority and boot from it. That's how you install. Well, after you install, change your boot priority back to your internal disk. And if you don't, this is what happens. But there's malware that also kills OS, right? That's very typical. So it will delete, right, your boot sector, and your boot sector is used to defer to C drive. So if your boot sector cannot defer to the C drive because it's not there, then your OS is not found. It cannot boot. Okay? Yeah, old school malware and even new ones, they change. You guys know how to identify your malware if you don't know it? So your antivirus only going to give you the known malware. If it's unknown, it might say unknown because it's seeing something misbehaving, right? Like, let's say that you have a list of bad kids in the class, and it would say, oh, that kid is bad. This kid is bad, right? But there's a behavior of someone else that's new, that's acting bad, right? It's going to say, oh, it doesn't know what that is. But malware is really designed to only recognize 60% of known things. So you can't rely 100% on your antivirus. But I'm sidetracking a little bit. We're almost done. So you can go to virus total. If you watch my other video, virus total. I have my student do malware hunt all the time. I had a student that did forensic class with me, and he was so curious about bug hunting. And then I made him write reports in forensic. And then eventually he compete for a Google challenge. He found a bug for Google. He won some money. He wrote to me. He gave me the screenshot of what they did.
He gave you some money.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So virus total, if you're suspicious about a file, a link, or something, right, you can go here and you can report it to them. And like domains, IP files, URLs, right? There's also like other, website domains that does that too. Like if, you know how you're not sure if you're being phished or not, they send you that weird link in the email, right? You should never click anything that you don't know. But anyway, you can dump it in here, right? Or you can there are AI equipped domains now that you can just attach that link to there and it will tell you whether it's good link or not. If you ask Gemini or ChatGPT or Siri and it's not sure, so you should check everything. And I also tell my parents about that, right? You get a text message from, your bank and say that your account has been breached and call this number. Check that number. Don't just call it because it looks like your bank, but be suspicious about that, right? Because they do a lot in phishing these days. But yeah, so you can do that with virus total. And malware is a common issue too in Windows PC for sure. I have high interest in the security part of that, right? Like when I retire, probably my research might be related to that, but okay. So the purpose of self-monitoring analysis reporting technology called the smart technology that you see on the old hard drive, it's really for to gauge, to control or regulate the drive temperature, to be able to access file for retry. So in the case that if it cannot open files or read files. So basically it goes to an address on the drive and then or the sector to be able to see the information. Like when we say read, it's technically trying to take that information and process it. Um, or if it's slow, if there's like bad sectors. So sectors are like chunks, or I should say section of your drive that stores data. And there's like size that are specific, like 512 bytes, but not all drives would have the same sector size. Some drives have bigger, right? And then if you have like drive failure. So in the case that if you work with servers, right, not necessarily because everybody might have solid state drive for their personal computer, but old servers would still have drives like this. External hard drive that you see, those are hybrid drives. So they are hard drive inside. Okay. So Link Bear is setting up a presentation in the conference room. His laptop is and the projector are unable to provide any image, right? So on the projector, what should he do? So it's funny because I have people that had this problem and I show up and the lens cap was still on. So, you tend to see that with like projector that's being moved around. Like, let's say you have a projector that you use for movies night, and then when you're done, you put the cap on it and then you put it away. And then you take it out and you plug it in and you're trying to play a movie again. Yeah, the lens cap is still there. That's happened a lot. Make sure that you remove it and then check your image source selection, the input. So on the button on top of the projector. Projectors are very cheap. I bought one that looks like a Coke can that I use. So whenever I travel and if I need like screen time or something to share with people in the room, right? Streaming Netflix and then projecting it for everybody to see from your tablet. Just bring those Bluetooth speaker and a mobile projector. And there you go. You have fun. Making sure your computer source is configured for projection. So to change your display, you can go into settings or you can right click anywhere on the desktop and go to display settings. And that helps you. And then of course, we want to check the data cable and the power cable for your projector. So the most expensive part on projection is the light bulb. Okay. Just like how printers are sold to sell ink. Did you know that? If you buy a printer for $60, but then you go and buy the ink, it's already $45. So a lot of the printers are really made to sell ink, right? And so your projector might be $120, but when your light bulb burns out, it will. All lights burn out because the gas eventually get used inside the bulb. Even the LED ones get burned out over time, right? But so this one is a laser projector. It's more intense and it's brighter. And then you have LED projector, just like how you have monitor. So different light projection type. So the bulb might be like $300 where your projector is also $300 or less. It's crazy how 3D printers is very affordable, right? Projectors are very affordable. Like you can personally own, you can have a movie room and be able to do that. And these screens, you can just have one that moves, right? Like you pull up with the legs and then you can just watch. Or sheets, you can hang them. All right. What are the causes of display artifacts? So the problem with display is that if you have graphic adapter or projector that is overheated. If people are overclocking your graphic processing unit, GPU stands for graphic processing unit, then uh they might also overheat or get worn out. Overcompressed graphics. I think a lot of things are in very good definition now, right? Like you guys have 4K, you have 8K. I think we are more in the 4K compared to the 8K in resolution, right? But sometimes you work with compressed graphics, like in animations or simulations, that can also cause the processor to work excessively. And you do see that with like graphic animators and people who work directly with graphics. Or sometimes you have lower resolution video that can cause the system to have to interpret it. So we push for higher resolution, but standard data resolution is not quite there, right? Like you have some games that are not there at 4K, but you have games that are at 4K, right? Um, Back in the day when you say 4K, you were like, wow, that's really, really good. But now you have, potentially games and movies that are higher than 4K, like 8K. But in the lower resolution side, it still needs to take that and adjust it to your equipment, right? Like, screen size and all of that for the resolution.
What did you say about the overclock GPU?
Yeah, so if you want to increase the speed for graphic, right? Like let's say your processor is running at a certain speed, like 3.2, but you want to turbocharge it. You want to increase the speed so it can be faster.
Mhm.
Yeah, it will likely have issues, right? So, and then you might have enlarged image to higher resolution to display. So to troubleshooting flickering on laptop and LCD, I had this problem recently. Update your graphic processing unit, your GPU driver. Um, you can look at the specification for your laptop or desktop. If you have an adapter, go to the website, download the driver that they have, and then install, right? And on the website, it would ask you which model you have. Like, for example, these Alienware, it has the old adapter, but a really good GPU on there, right? Like I would go into Alienware website and then I would put in the model of the tower and it would tell me the adapter, it would give me the adapter driver. Typically that's on a support tab or support link of the website. Now, if you have a laptop that doesn't have graphic processing unit by itself, it's an integrated one with the processor or the motherboard, then you need to download the chipset driver, which is for the motherboard, or go to the actual vendor, right? So Intel, if it's an integrated graphic, you can just download it from there. But if you buy an HP laptop, go to HP first. Put in the model, and then it will also give you the driver. I think brand specific, they do that so that way it's centralized a lot of these things. If it's flickering, that we talked about this before, right? Failing inverter. We can replace the inverter, check backlight failure, and replace the monitor if backlight fails. So how do you avoid persistent image on the LCD screen? Plasma was created. They're not too common in consumer world anymore because plasma was actually more expensive to produce compared to LCD. You guys know the plasma screen. Your grandparents might have it or your parents. I remember when plasma first came out, I owned a plasma TV and it was very pretty, right? It's very hot also, but it's glass based for most part in plasma. You do see this when you see like some screen in like buildings and hotels and so on, but a lot of them use industrial LCD base. Like when you drive by the dealership and you see that huge screen, right? A lot of them are LCD based. We actually work with the company that installed those for the apprenticeship and also like internship program. My former students, they did a lot of those. So persistent image is like a burnt in image. Do you ever had like, like a little shadow of something in the back of, and when you turn it off or when you turn it on or you change the screen background, you still see a little bit, like a tiny bit of it, right? So if you change it, the screensaver, and just making your screen constantly refresh, um, now I think Microsoft is doing a really good job using AI in changing like background image. So I use their program, so it gives me like different background every so often. You can modify that in the configuration so it doesn't have burnt in screen, especially if you use LCD, right? And then they also use like tools that you can wash the screen. So basically it zero out the actual pixel and then it reaccumulate that. Especially on the plasma, you see a lot of that. But plasma is not that common anymore. You need to know it, even though some people might still use it, then you have to be able to fix it. So a client complains that his smartphone cannot be charged, right? How can you help the client? Make sure the charger is rated for the phone first. So I'm gonna move. Can I move 29 down? You done with 28 or maybe we can 28. Sorry. Okay. Check the charging port. Sometimes it gets dirty. So let me ask you, how do you clean your phone and how often do you clean your phone?
That's a big question. I don't know.
You know, the phone has the most bacteria because people touch it so often and you often don't wash your hands when you touch it.
Can we use Windex?
Windex is for glass. I mean, you can use anything you want to clean, but some cleaner are better than other. Just alcohol wipes is good.
And
right?
damage the screen.
Yeah, well, alcohol wipes sometimes leave streaks on your screen, but in most part, I haven't gotten problem with my Samsung. However, right? But you should clean your phone more regularly. Just like how you should. If you wash your hands often, then clean your phone often, at least once a day. Even if you have cover, clean the covers of your phone, right? Because the inside might not be touched. All right. Yeah, alcohol wipes is good. If you don't have wipes, you can just clean with soft tissue and alcohol, right? Or cotton, those beauty pads or those pads. You can just put a little bit of alcohol. I have a little spray bottle that I use. You don't have to dilute the alcohol and you don't have to use like super high alcohol content. Whatever alcohol you have, rubbing alcohol is generally pretty good. Yeah, don't use drinking alcohol. Checking charging port for the device for dirt or lint or residue. Check the port, right, for debris. The cable sometimes is the cost. For my phone, a lot of the times my USB-C goes through a lot of wear and tear, I guess. So I always have to replace my cable. And then I also have like the magnetic charge too. I don't use it so much. I just feel like I don't know. I it is fast charging and you can charge another phone with it, but too much magnetism around you maybe. But yeah, I have a docking station that does that too. So and then for the old iOS and non-iOS devices, you just got to make sure that you check because Apple has rated charging equipment. And if it's not rated equivalent to Apple, it's not going to work. Now, this is long, okay? So just summarize it. So if you use the USB port on your laptop or your desktop to charge your phone, just to make sure that that port is good. And then if you can't change smartphone from an unpowered USB hub, because not all USB hub, now most of them are, but you have to know that sometimes you might have USB hub that's not rated for that power, right? So that means it cannot charge. So you can't just plug it into anywhere. Now they make it where it's super abundant, it's available, right? You guys go outside and you see all those solar panel little benches, right? When I first came, that was my idea and the director of Makerspace idea. We went to Mountain Hood College and they are super green with their campus. And I was like, oh, this is so nice. It's a beautiful campus. It has these solar little umbrellas, and the students can just like, hang out and they do their work. And so I was like, we should have that. So everybody voted on it, and so they bought that. So now you have those little solar benches that you can charge. So yeah, there's a lot of charging station that's available because of the mobile devices. But keep in mind that not all computers, even old computers, might not have the hub for you to charge it. So if it's not rated for that, it cannot charge. Just like how power banks sometimes cannot run everything and charge everything, right? You have to kind of look at the wattage and the in that, or the amps. So, and then if you check all of the issues, if there's no success, likely it's a cable. Just use a known working cable. And then sometime it's the phone battery, right? Replacing phone battery these days are a little bit more challenging than back in the days because you have to open the back, just like how we talked about how they sealed it in very good. So before you approach that, you just gotta make sure you research and don't void your warranty. Okay. And then if you have insurance for your phone, likely that they'll just replace it. So I grandfathered in for T-Mobile because I have used T-Mobile for a long, long, long time, since BlackBerry days. I don't know if you guys know BlackBerry. So with the QWERTY key. So I had the first BlackBerry all the way to the fifth BlackBerry. And then BlackBerry eventually got bought out and went out of business, right? They were the first company that implemented encryption in mobile devices, right? And their cryptography technology is a little bit different. Anyway, I have true free data. I don't have a cap, a limit, or a throttle, right? So, and then I also bought a package where I can replace my phone every so often, the way you pay, right? But I always question them about that. But I eventually invest in my own phone anyways, because the one that they replace is not what I wanted. However, so sometimes you can negotiate with just, paying the same or paying a little bit more and you still get the old stuff. So, all right, 30. Gary asked you to help him troubleshoot his tablet. Some of the apps are not able to load. How can you help Gary? Right. Check your storage, which is RAM. If the system is out of storage, then the app will not run. It's important that we update our apps regularly and push your OS updates, especially if you're running Android. I think Android just pushed one recently, right? I didn't necessarily like their I have Samsung, so Samsung pushes one UI. The interface has changed and sometimes I don't like the interface look. But anyways, you can also roll back. However, pushing updates is going to help you close security problem. You should uninstall the app or disable it if you're not using it. But we can uninstall and reinstall it. I had to do this on my phone recently because, I keep trying to use the app and it was looping. Like it wasn't letting me log in. And if it lets me log in, it's not working correctly. So uninstall the app and reinstall the app. And you can also close out some apps. If you check your app settings, it should tell you like how much storage each app is using, and you can force stop it, or you can, disable it, or you can uninstall it. So when you uninstall apps, just like everything else on computing systems, it takes away the relevant data, okay, to that app. But when you disable the app, that data exists, okay, somewhere. So in order to access that data again, because application is tied with data, so you have to have the app for the data, just like how Word is for doc, right? in order to read it, you have to have the application. So you would likely have to install the app again to read it or convert it. There are tools that you can convert it to other formats. And then if it is web app, then make sure that there's connection. 99% of your applications are web app. All the games that you're playing on the mobile devices, your map, all of them are web related. You can go offline to a certain extent, right? But it needs your location if you're using map and so on. So yeah, in my ethical hacking class, I always emphasize web application assessment. I do multiple labs in it, and also that's my area too. So they were like, why is it always like that? It's like, because that's what we use, right? That's every business have a web app. Every business, one way or another. Or they use one, or they use one through a vendor. So if you have a swollen battery, it's overcharging. They look swollen, right? Like pregnant. It's curved a little bit when you set the devices on a flat surface. It wiggles. You touch it. It's like moving back and forth, pivots. Overcharging.
What about if you're living in the sun?
It might get hot, but if it's plugged in, it might get hot. So I was in Georgia Tech for a training during a summer years ago, and I was streaming from my phone, like music, just to be outside. And Atlanta in the summer is very hot and very humid. My phone was overheated, and it tells me it's overheating. It's not playing anymore. So yeah, so a lot of times it, heat will cause your system to slow down and so on. But so how do you disassemble mobile devices? I see one student was replacing the screen back there. How do you organize the parts, right? Before you start taking things apart, take pictures of it. Like I said before, approach it like a regular computer, because it is a computer, just in a different size and different case. You should use some kind of tray to separate components so you don't get mixed up. So, in the technical industry, the more organized you are, whether you become a software developer, a security professional, a technician, an administrator, the more organized you are, when you start solving the problem, the easier it's going to be for you, right? So when you're fixing thing or building computer, just be organized so that way you don't have a lot of cleanup, you don't have to refix a lot of the things. So you might have like compartments or lidded trays. You can buy containers, like the dollar container, and you can put things in there. So that way you can separate it. You can use anti-static mats that have that. I have one on my table, on my desk. And then I put, because sometimes I'm working on my laptop and I'm also tinkering with hardware. So yeah, so you can just be organized about it. And then you put the screw sets in compartments. I think at the dollar store they sell those little toolbox and they have these little slots, right? You can put different screws. So it's really made for like mechanics and things. So you can put screws in there. So you don't have to spend a lot of money, or you can just go get like containers in your house. Find things that work, right? Be creative. You should use anti-static strap, or make sure that if it's anti-static, like CPU, RAM and stuff, it comes with these silver bags or the bags with the black stripes, right? Those are anti-static bags, so keep them in there. And then before you touch the component, touch the bags, because it would de-static you. And touch metal. Get grounded. One more. Before we're done, one more bullet. Let me move it down. And then I'm going to try to drop your virtual machine since most of you are logged in. And then the last item is they also come with bubble wrap or a larger bags, right? Like motherboard and then, so you want to use boxes or case to protect it. So you don't want things to fall on it or stuff like that. So when you open devices, just to make sure that they're not connected to other conductivity type of product. So what are things that are conductive? You are conductive, water is conductive, metal is conductive, right? You can use screwdriver with it, but not, not the magnetic ones. Okay. So, and then make sure that you don't have a lot of static based stuff around it. Did you know that if you put RAM on magnetic things like speaker, it can ruin your RAM? Okay. Old speaker has a lot of magnetic built inside, but the portable speakers now they seal it pretty well. So like, yeah, don't put things on magnetic things. Like some old file cabinets have those magnetic hinge where the drawer pulls back on its own, right? Or sometimes now they build it with motors where it's retracting. Um, but yeah, so just be mindful about those things. And that's all she wrote for the assignment. That was very long. So like I said, if you want more details and more things for A plus, CIS-25 is the class. That's 16 weeks, right? I'm trying to condense the major general things for home use for basic and giving you some tips if you still want to go for A plus in this. So it can be reviewed for you or introduce you to new information. I hope you learn a little bit, at least something to take away in this class. And maybe draw your interest into, fixing things and building things, right? That's my goal. Yeah, and you made it to the 4th day. So let me stop the video. I haven't uploaded videos last night. So